Okay, Boker Tov. Today's daf is daf Tzadik Aleph in Yevmot. Tzadik Aleph. Let's go back to the Mishnah for a moment. Pei Zayin is the Mishnah. What are we talking about? A woman whose husband went overseas, and one person came back and said he's dead. She remarried based on she went to court, and the court said, well, we'll check things out. That's all we've got. They allowed her to get married, and then the husband showed up. So we fine her for not checking carefully. Bezdin only allowed her to do it based on the fact that she's an aguna. We don't want her to be tied up forever. And she should check things out. However, if she didn't, and obviously she didn't check it out well enough because the husband showed up, so she has to leave both of them, not only the second husband for sure, because she's not married to the second guy. The second guy is basically an adulterer, halachically. And even though it was done b'shogeg, she has to leave both of them. She needs a get from both of them, says the Tanakama. Doesn't get a ksuba, everything doesn't work. Let's say either of them die, either of the husband, the real husband, and the second guy, number two, let's call him number two. He is, if he dies, there's no yibam or chalitza. However, we need chalitza midrabanan. Even in the first case, where if her first husband dies, she's really married to the number one. She should be yibam or chalitza. The rabbis made a knas, no yibam, just do chalitza. All these things different apply to her. If she's a Bas Yisrael, she can't marry a Kohen. A Bas Levi can't eat Meiser. Bas Kohen, Pasuk and Truma, and Yorshin. And then it says the Yorshin don't get a ksuba. The Gemara is going to talk about that. Now let's take from the top of the page. So the Mishnah said, if she's a Bas Yisrael, she can't marry a Kohen. It's just pshita. Obviously, she's like a regular Jewish woman who was raped, who was married and raped, can't marry a Kohen. She's like a zoner now. So obviously, she's possible. The answer is Bas Levi min ha-meiser. The chiddush is that even if she's a Bas Levi, she can't eat meiser. Bas Levi min ha-meiser, mimivsa, she's really possible. If Bas Levi was raped, let's say, she can't eat meiser anymore? Mimivsa b'znus, just by having znus, by being raped, let's say, or znus with a goy, is she possibly eating truma? By the time we learned Leviya shenishbas, she was captured by the goy, let's say. So she's assumed that she was that they abused her. Osha nivala bilas nus. So she had some sort of bilas nus, meaning with somebody that she wasn't supposed to sleep with. No, so she can eat mice and she can eat it. This is a different case. This is not a case time where Bas Levi was mizana with somebody or slept with somebody that she wasn't supposed to, like a Bas Kohen who becomes a zona. Bas Levi doesn't have that rule of a zona. She doesn't eat truma anyway. She just eats meiser, and she normally is not forbidden from eating meiser just for having committed some sort of adultery. But over here it's a knas because she didn't check carefully. She was married, and she was a married woman, and she should have checked carefully before she remarried, even though 1A came. Bezdin basically made a mistake, but they said, check it out and we'll allow you to do it. But at the end of the day, it turns out she made a mistake, and we give her a knas. All these rules about that she loses her ksuba, and she has to leave the first marriage. Also, it's a knas. She did b'shogeg. She wasn't a regular sota who committed adultery, premeditatedly, right? She didn't say, I'm going to sleep with this guy, even though I'm married I'm going to sleep with number two, even though I'm married to number one. She meant it innocently, yes, but still a knas for not checking carefully. Bas Kohen made a truma. She's Bas Kohen. She can't eat truma. Obviously, she's even a Bas Levi can't eat meiser. Safil b'truma rabbanan. Even truma rabbanan, like we have today, presumably with the truma we have today is truma rabbanan. Even that the rabbis gave her knas, and she can't eat that. All these rules apply to Ben Yoshin Shilzev, Yoshin. So first the Mishnah said that we give her a knas. She's not entitled to her k'tuba because she was a bad girl and she didn't check carefully. She's not entitled to k'tuba. She's not entitled to payers that her husband would have eaten. Mizon, she's not entitled to sustenance, to whatever you call that, alimony, support, right? They call that support. Below blows, any worn out furniture, clothing, things like that her husband may have used up. No, she's not entitled to anything. And then it says her children don't get a ksuba. What do you mean children don't get a ksuba? There is no ksuba. Didn't we say that already? It says the Gemara, ksuba ma'ived. What kind of ksuba we talk about? She doesn't get the ksuba. So what are you saying? Her yorshin or yorshin shazev yorshin zeh. The ain yorshin shazev yorshin zeh. In other words, if she had children from either husband, the second one obviously be a mamzer. The first one we said is a mamzer drabanan. If she had kids afterwards from the first husband, it's like a mamzer drabanan. So they're not getting. There is no ksuba. I'm a public ksuba's been different. This is famous called there's a condition in a ksuba that the rabbis put in called Ksubas benin different. Benin means male sons. What does that mean? That, again, we said normally who inherits a woman? Her husband, right? Remember, her husband inherits her. If she has no husband, then her family inherits her, her children, no children, her father. But normally your husband inherits her. Okay. We want to encourage the father-in-law, the man's father-in-law, to put some money into the wedding, to give her a nice nadunya, right? So we tell him, but he says, listen, I'm going to give you a nadin. I'm going to give you a lot of money here and for the marriage. And if the husband dies first, okay, so then the ksuba goes to her and to his children, right? The part of the ksuba he has to pay her the $200 or $2 million, whatever he says, or because that will go to her, and then his regular estate will go to his children, to his sons, whatever, the bechor, girls if there's no boys. That's all fine and dandy. What happens if she dies first? The husband inherits her. So the guy says like this, I don't get it. I'm going to give you $1 million, the father-in-law, right? The bride's found, I'm going to give you $1 million, right? For the wedding and for your marriage. And if the wife dies, what happens to the money? Goes to the husband and he marries somebody else. And then the kids that they have from that second marriage, they get my money. So he says, no. I want my grandsons to get this money. If anything happens to the wife, that's called the ksuba different. So that's not the ksuba that she gets. That's the ksuba that if she dies, if the wife dies, her children will get this money, and it won't go to the children of the husband's second wife that he takes subsequently. That's like Ibsen different. So even that they don't get. Pshita, he said there's no ksuba. The whole ksuba is invalid. This is part of the ksuba. Now the same of the God of the sort of she who's committed a sin, she's done a prohibition by taking on the second man without checking carefully. So Kansur Rabbanan, the Rabbanan fined her and took away her ksuba. Lazara lo Kansur, why should her children lose out? Why should her sons? The man, the father-in-law, gave this money for his grandchildren. They didn't do anything wrong. Mashma, no, they get their part of the knas too. It's like the general question of Mamzer. Mamzer didn't do anything wrong. He was just born that way, right? That's tough luck. Those are the rules. Okay, now, what happened again? She was married to number one. One went overseas. They came and said he was dead. She married number two based on his testimony and getting permission from the court. She got permission from the court. And of course, if it turned out that the court was wrong because number one showed up now. So what's the rule? The rule is she has to leave both of them. She can't marry either one. She needs a get from both of them. Second one, Rabbanan, the first one, you need a real get. She's really married to number one. And if either one of them dies now, there's no yibum. That's what he said. She's really married to number one, right? So if he dies now, while this whole thing is in turmoil, he dies. She needs chalitza, even she needs chalitza. The rabbi said, no yibum. No yibum. You've sinned now. You're out of this family, right? You've sinned. Get out. Or achiv, it says in the lashon of yachid. So it's echav means any of his brothers, and let's say it's a lashon of yachid because it's lashon of chol. It's not chol sim. Achiv sheni, the brother of the second guy, chol min rabban. There's no yibum over here min rabban because she's not really married to number two. But you need chalitza min rabban. Why do you need chalitza at all? She's not really married to number two, right? She's married. A woman can only be married to one guy. She's married to number one. So she slept with number two, thinking that it was a marriage. She gave her chuppah and kedushin and all that, but it's really meaningless. Now the answer is it's min rabbanan. They say you need it because people will think, after all, since number one at the end of the day is giving her a get, people will think maybe she was really married to number two, so you have to have chalitza. Rabbi Yossi disagrees. Now we had different opinions in the Mishnah. So first we had all these prohibitions. You're gonna get a get from both. No ksuba, no nothing. You got it. The kids are mamzer. Everybody's a mamzer. Any children here? Nobody. If they're Kohanim, they can't go to her funeral. Nobody is entitled to her any of her findings or her paycheck, and they can't break an adarim, can't eat truma. All these rules apply to her. Then we have other opinions. Rabbi Yossi says the Mishnah, she gets ksuba. Ksuba is from her first husband. First husband didn't do anything wrong. He gets the first ksuba. Okay, Rabbi Lezer says not only that, first husband is entitled to her paycheck and things that she finds and can break an adarim. Shimon says even do yibum. Let's say the first guy dies now. First guy did nothing wrong, right? The wife thought he was dead and went and married somebody else by mistake. But if let's say the first guy dies, now he hears the terrible news that his wife slept with somebody else. He had a heart attack and dies. So the first guy's brother would do yibum. That's what he says. there is Yibam. Rav Shimon says, Bia Sechilotza Miachim Shel Rishon Poter Sarasa. It's a good Bia. It's a good Yibam because we're not going to prohibit a Bia over here. This is a proper thing to do. They're first married. So there were three different opinions. Rav Yossi, Rav Elazar, and Rav Shimon. Different rules. Do they all agree with one another? Says the Gemara, no. Amar Rav Huna Bas Basra Melech Kamoi. The later ones, Rav Shimon and Rav Elazar, agree with Rav Yossi, the first one who said she gets the ksuba. The second one said he gets even the paycheck, let's say, with the other things. And the third one says you can even if he dies, you perform yibam. You don't force him and say, well, since there was some hanky panky over here, we're going to leave him out of the family. No, you do even yibam. So he says the later ones are certainly motive. The later opinion is certainly motive to the earlier opinions. But the first opinions, kamoi lo model basroi. What do we mean by that? Rav Shimon, who says you could even do yibam model Rav Elazar. He's model Rav Elazar. The ma bia the ikka yisura lo kanas bia, which is a real isser. We're talking about a real prohibition over here. We're not talking about money matters. We're talking about bia. He says that they didn't consent that, meaning if the first brother dies, you even do yibam. Koshkim and Siyasa, certainly if money matters, like he finds something that she finds he's entitled to, her paycheck, the mamon is only money, certainly that would be okay to continue. So Rav Shimon was certainly voted to Rav Elazar. Rav Elazar, no, Rav Shimon, Rav Elazar, not Rav Shimon. But Siyasa, the mamon, we're not going to fine her over money matters. I will bia the surah, bia, which is a prohibition normally. If it's not permitted, you're talking about a real, having sexual relations. Be the Isuru, kind of that we didn't go that far, and then he did give a knas. So Rav Elazar would not be motive to Rav Shimon, if Rav Shimon would be motive to Rav Elazar. The Tarbayu and both motive Rav Yossi. Why? Because Rav Yossi says she gets the ksuba. Okay, Hani dias v'tusa lokanis. Listen to this. When we give allowing yibam or allowing her paycheck and the money to flow between them, if you didn't make a knas there, and those things are encouraging her to stay in the marriage, right? Even though, according to the Tanakama, he has to give her a get. But those things which would encourage her to stay in the marriage, if he didn't find those things, what is the purpose of the ksuba? To leave, give the ksuba and leave. The other things encourage her to stay, keep the paycheck, money matters, her findings I'll keep. So certainly, certainly they would agree that she gets the ksuba. Rav Yossi wouldn't be motive to them. They didn't make a knas, the rabbis didn't make a knas on the ksuba. In other words, what are we saying? Again, because she committed a mistake, we say she should, these things should apply to her. She's entitled to the ksuba though, because by giving you the ksuba, she's going to leave the marriage anyway and paying you off and leave the marriage. So ksuba, which is given in order to take the money and go leave the marriage, that we didn't consent. But these other things, saying that he's entitled to her paycheck or her findings or breaking her darm, those are things which encourage the marriage to go on. And the rabbis have said that the marriage must end. He has to give her a get. So therefore, Rav Yossi would not agree with Rav Elazar and Rav Shimon. That's the way Rav Huna learns. Rav Yochanan learns just the opposite. Rav Yochanan just the opposite. Rav Yossi is motive to Rav Elazar and Rav Shimon. The later ones are not motive to Kamoy. Rav Yossi, motive to Rav Elazar, is motive to Rav Elazar. Ksuba, listen to this. Ksuba listen to this. Something he has to give her. Who is the wronged party over here? The wronged party is the man. Who is the one who did the bad thing? The woman, right? She went overseas. She got a report that he's dead, and she went and married number two. He didn't do anything wrong. The woman, the wife over here, is the wrong one. So over here, listen to this. Rav says, "Ksuba, she's entitled to her ksuba lo kanas," right? Rav Yossi says she's entitled to ksuba. So Rav Yossi, who says what? Even stuff that she's supposed to get from him, even though she's the bad party over here, if you didn't find that, certainly things that she finds that go to him, her findings, her paycheck, the day that she gives him, certainly you wouldn't find that. In other words, the bad party over here is the wife. She's the one who committed adultery effectively, right? So if we don't constant her, like it says, give her the ksuba, certainly things that she's supposed to give him, the husband, he's entitled to that. Rav Elazar, but Rav Elazar is not motive to Rav Yossi, but she also might see that who did he day? Says things that she's supposed to give him. Yeah, that why should he get fined? He didn't do anything wrong. Well, we didn't make a fine there. Which goes from him to her that she gets. We gave her a knas. We fined her because she was the bad party. But Rav Shimon, they're both motive to Rav Shimon. Listen to this. Mahani to Machaim Lokansi. These things, which are while they're alive, while number one and his wife are alive, he didn't consent them. Motive Rav Shimon. Mahani to Machaim Lokansi. Be it lachem misal koshkin. Listen, if these things, right, they're both motor to Reb Shimon, if things you didn't find them while they're alive, certainly, what's the even case? The even case is number one died now. So should his brother perform Yibam? Yeah, it's after death. Nothing's wrong over, he's dead already. So you're not going to find things that were while they're alive, if you didn't give a knas there, which could be encouraging them to stay together. So certainly after Misa, you're not going to constant over there. He's dead now. He's not moted to Rabbi Yossi and to Rabbi Lezer. There is no knas. But the things that take place while they're alive, there we give a knas because those things encourage them to stay together. Okay, so we said in the Mishnah that this is all where one person reported that he was dead. If two people reported that he was dead, the Tanakama said, and we see the Tanakama is Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon says, listen, in this is Shelo B'Shush, she didn't get married with the Shus of Bezin, but two Adam came along. We always say nothing is stronger than two Adam. So if two Adam came along and said she was dead, that he was dead, and she married number two, then number one showed up. What's the rule? Says the Tanakama, Muteras Lachla, she can go back to number one. She's innocent. She's like she was raped. She didn't do anything wrong. Obviously, she's not married to a Kohen, but married to Yisrael, she can go back to number one. That's what the Tanakama said. That's what Reb Shimon said. So she would need a get from number two D'Rabbanan. The people shouldn't say that, but she can go back to number one. So that's what we're going to discuss now. Amar Funa Marav, so that's the halacha. That she can go back to number one. She go back to number one, and there's and it's clear. We're going to talk about the get. Does she need a get from number two? That's really an issue. You said, does she need a get? The simple shot is that maybe according to Rav Shimon says she can go back to number one. She wouldn't need a get. We'll just talk about that now. That's the halacha. That's the halacha, and this is Shelo B'Rishus, that she got married with Rishus, but with two Adam. She go back question. Why are you saying it in such a roundabout manner? That's the halacha. If you hold like Reb Shimon, they even say the halacha is like Reb Shimon. The Shemaita of Reb Shimon, because what you're saying goes like Reb Shimon, who says that she can go back to the first husband. And maybe you'll say, yeah, I mean, if I say halacha is like Reb Shimon, even in the first case where she got married based on one witness, and when she got married on one witness, Reb Shimon say she got married based on the testimony of one witness. Reb Shimon says he also tells us that you can even form yibam over there, and the kid's not a mamzer. Maybe he means that too. So Amos will say halacha Reb Shimon B'achron in the last case where we talk about where she got married based on the testimony of two people, and she can go back to her first husband. Kasha. Okay, it's a kasha. Why Rav Huna said halacha? The halacha is that this is the halacha, and this is Shelo B'Rishus. She can go married to her first husband. She can go back to her first husband, and if she go back to her first husband, presumably she doesn't need a get, like you were saying. Now we'll see if she doesn't need a get. But that's how he said it. He said that's the halacha. He didn't say halacha like Reb Shimon in the last case. He said that's the halacha. Rav Sheshes. You have this very often. When Rav said this, he must have been half asleep. In other words, it doesn't make sense. He said Rav Huna says the name of Rav, that the halacha is that way, that if two people come along and say, two witnesses say that number one died, and she married number two, she can go back to number one. Halacha machlal the pligi. Somebody argues with that. I have a limit. What could it have done? Nanasan Caesar, she was effectively raped. She was forced. Two witnesses. There's nothing stronger than two witnesses in halacha, right? Two witnesses come along and say that he's dead. So what was she supposed to have done? Why shouldn't she be able to go back to her first husband? Isn't everybody motive to that? Is there an argument about that? You say that's the halacha. Is there an argument? But not only that. Listen to this. Tiny will call her Shabbat Torah. Somebody commits adultery, let's say, with their sister or somebody they're not supposed to live with, right? They don't need to get from the second guy because clearly it's an erva, it's not a marriage, right? Except for a married woman, she got married through a bezdin, like this case where one guy came along, Alpi bezdin, and who the boy gets? Then she needs to get from the second guy. Alpi Adam, low boy gets mashma that Adam. If two Adam come, that's your question. If two Adam come along and say he's dead, and she gets married to number two, and then number one shows up. She doesn't need to get from number two because she did nothing wrong. Who the boy get? Alpi Adam low mashma through Adam. She doesn't need to get. Who says that? Money. Elaim Rav Shimon. Alpi bezin the boy get. Does she need to get even through a bezin? By time Rav Shimon Omer also bezin by Rosam by giving a psak and saying she can get married. Kizadon ish be'isha. It's like a man who is marrying her. It's like a man who's living with a woman on purpose, adulterously, and because ish be'isha. Al Piedim kishkigas is like a shkaga b'ishisha. Since he says that he's comparing Zadok, if Bezin paskins with El Ra, it's like a person who committed adultery on purpose. If he committed Adam, it's like a mistake made. Eat, since he compares the two, smash for neither one needs to get. So if it's Reb Shimon, who is the one who says that Al Pi Bezin rather, that needs a get, the boy get? Who says that? It must be the rabbis, because according to Reb Shimon, apparently, you don't need to get in either case. Elalav, it's Rabbanan, right? You see the Rabbanan, and what do the Rabbanan say? Only Al Pi Echad do you need to get. Al Pi Shnei Edom, you don't need to get. You don't need to get because 2 Edom told her to do it. 2 Edom said he's dead, and therefore she did nothing wrong. And now she goes back to her first husband legitimately, and you don't need to get. Must be the Rabbanan. So you see, everybody agrees with that. So what do you mean the halacha is this way, that she can go back to her first husband, you don't need to get? She says, no, Lolam Rav Shimon, it is Rav Shimon. This is how you can understand this brisa. The brisa that said that all women who commit adultery don't need to get from the adulterer, except for Eishes Shenisal Pi Bezin, Rav Shimon Omer, Asu Bezin Barasan, Kekavanas Ish Be'isha. What it means over here, when the brisa says that what the brisa says, Rav Shimon Omer, Asu Bezin Barasan Kazadin Ish means, it's like he wanted to marry her. In other words, when Bezin gave him hara, she's allowed to get married. So it's like a man who wants to marry gives her kedushin, and there she needs to get a boy get. Al Pi Edom, if it's through Edom without a Bezin, Edom came along, she didn't go to Bezin. Shalok going to see Ishbisha, below boy get. That's not like, Bezin says you're allowed to get married, so she married the guy. But it's not, you don't need to get because it wasn't like a real intention. It's zif. In other words, it's not really, she did intend to marry number 2. That's the fact. She was innocent. She might have made a mistake, but she planned to marry him. But it's like, if it was without Bezin, if Bezin did it, it's like she's permitted to marry. So she's a proper chuppah kedushin, and she'll need to get. With Shalobik of low boy get. So it could be that's Reb Shimon. It's not the Rabbanim. In other words, we're trying to prove now that the Rabbanim disagree with the Mishnah. When the Mishnah says if 2 Edom said that she can be married to number 2, she can go back to number 1 when he shows up. That's only Reb Shimon's opinion. The Rabbanim say either way. There were 2 Edom. She still should have checked more carefully. Still give her a knas. And that's talk that we'll see the halacha, meaning you say the halacha is this way, and now we said, what do you mean halacha is this way? Who argues with that? Number 1, what could she have done? There were 2 Edom. Number 2, that we have a brisa which seems to say here, Al Pi Edom, if it was Pi Edecha, then she needs a get. Mashma Pi Shnei Edom, she doesn't need a get. Isn't that the Rabbanan? No, it's Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon says that. Another pshat, Rav Ashi Amalini Yisur, he's not talking about get at all. Also, Bezin Barasan, when Bezin Paskin, she can get married. It's like he intended to commit she intended to commit adultery, and she can't marry her husband. She can't go back to her husband. Al Pi Edom, if you're there with Edom, Kishikas, it's like a mistake. It's like a mistake, and she can go back to her husband. That's Reb Shimon's opinion. That if 2 Edom came along and said that her husband's dead, she married number 2, she can go back to number 1. That's Reb Shimon. He's not talking about the get, but the truth is, you still need a get from the first one. In other words, we're trying to say maybe Reb Shimon says you don't need to get at all. Reb Shimon says you do need to get in the case where she married based on 1 Eid and Bezin. But if 2 Eidim came along, she doesn't need. That's Reb Shimon's opinion, not the Rabbanim. Ravina says another shot in that brisa. Lenient carbon, he's only talking about the carbon. Also, Bezin Rasim Kazad Nish Be'isha. If Bezin Paskin that way, they made a mistake for low master just carbon because you did it based on Bezin. Bezin told you to marry number 2. So if she married number 2 by mistake, now it turns out it's a mistake because number 1 showed up. She doesn't need a carbon. But Al Pi Eidim, where she didn't do it with a Bezin, she goes, it's like a mistake. It must have been she has to bring a carbon. In other words, if Bezin Paskin, she doesn't have to bring a carbon for committing adultery. That's what she did at the end. At the end of the day, it was adultery, even though she was somewhat innocent. But she should have checked more carefully. Fine. But if she did it with a Bezin, she doesn't bring a carbon. That's what Shimon says. Al Pi Eidim, and she has to bring a carbon. If you boy saying no, this idea that we said over here, get puts me Al Pi Bezin, Mashma Pi Bezin, then you need a get, right? But Al Pi Shnei Eidim, then she doesn't need a get. No, by saying it really is Rabbanan, and she need a get even with the 2. The truth is Vishanis is Al Pi Bezin. Both cases, this Al Pi Bezin is with 1 Eid. Visha is where she got married based on 2 Eidim without a Bezdin. And either way, you need a get. That's the answer point. Is according to the answer to your question, does she need a get? According to the Rabbanan, she needs a get from the second one because she's got to leave both of them. She's got to need to get from the second one and from the first one, right? Because the first one for sure she needs to get because she can't stay married to him, but even for the second one. And according to Rav Shimon, she wouldn't need, if she got married based on the testimony of two witnesses, then she go back to her first husband. She doesn't need a get from the second one because her first marriage is still intact, so to speak. She doesn't need a get from the second one. Okay, so what are we saying now? That this is the key here to understand. The way our Mishnah read, the Mishnah said if she got married based on testimony of one guy, she needs to get from both. She has to leave. She's a bad girl. She didn't check carefully. If two Adam came along and said it, she can go back to her first husband. She doesn't need to get from the second guy. It was a simple mistake. Sorry, no penalty. Go back to your first husband. Kid's not a mamzer from the first husband. The rules don't apply. That's Rav Shimon. The Rabbanan disagree. The Rabbanan say whether she got married based on the testimony of one aid and Bezdin agreeing to it, or two Adam, either way, she has to leave both marriages. That's the Rabbanan's opinion. Same thing would be. The same thing would be, even if two Adam and a Bezdin, because it's still a mistake. Mistake was still made. It was a mistake at the end of the day. We're going to see that tomorrow. This is basically a mistake. This is not a wrong psak. This is not a legal argument. They thought this way and they thought that way. This is simply a mistake in fact. They didn't know that he's alive. So the whole thing is a mistake. And because of that, she should have checked more carefully, despite the fact that there were two Adam. That's what the rabbi said. What should she have done? What should she have done? So that was the first point. We said, why do you say lochas like Reb Shimon? Number one, you seem to have a number two here in the proofs. The number two is the Brisa seems to say, like the Rabbanan, and they say that in the case of two, you don't need a get. No, we said at the end that's Reb Shimon, or that's the Rabbanan, but you need a get in both cases. But the first question was, what should she have done? She has two Adam. What should she have done? So because of what should she have done, that's a svara to say that she should be able to go back to her first husband. What should she have done? She did nothing wrong. The answer at the end of the day is she should have still checked more carefully. Now the Gemara is going to ask kashas about that. Aren't we going to show that? Aren't we going to show? You say, what should she have done? Masavula, what is that a spar at all? You're asking, what should she have done? What should she have done? Is that a svara? Of a time we learn, let's say you wrote a get. A get has to have the zman and it has to have the place, the names, everything has to be in order. Let's say they wrote it not for the proper date. Today we date according to Brias HaOlam. They used to date according to the Malchus Yisrael, right? Let's say they wrote it for a Malchus, a date that was improper, L'Shem Malchus Shein Hogenes, like the Roman date. It's called Enogenes, Rashi says, because they don't have their own language and their own script. An improper government. L'Shem Malchus Madai, L'Shem Malchus Yavan, the Medes or the Greeks, Lebinyan Abayis, the Churban Abayis, you write according to the date of the base which was built or destroyed. We don't use those dates. He was on the east and he wrote it in the Marv. He wrote it at the wrong place. It was written, it's written. They write it to New York City. He wrote St. Louis instead of New York City, that's invalid. Or Marv wrote in the west because of Mizrach and you wrote in the east. Taisim is it's an invalid get. So you gave her get from number one. She married number two. No good. She committed adultery because number one didn't give her a proper get. Because all these rules, all these fines that we claim, no ksuba, can't get her paycheck, all those rules apply. But what should he have done? The sofa wrote the get. The guy innocently took the get and he gave it to her. He thought he did the right thing. He was getting divorced. They were Adam. Adam saw him give her the get. But all these penalties apply. Why? So what should he have done? So what do you see? That what should he have done is not an answer. The answer is no. That's different. In the case of the two Adam, maybe you could say, what should she have done? Two Adam came along and said it. He was dead. She assumed he was dead. Here, he should have had the get read by an impartial rabbi, a rabbi who knows how to read the get. That's what he should have done over here, and therefore the knasim apply. I'll bring another book. Let's say a man marries his yivama. Now, what happens when there's, let's say there are two wives, right? He left two wives. He marries one of them. The other one's free to marry somebody else, right? You only do on one. Now the other one went and got married. Benim Tzizu Island, it turns out that the first wife that committed the Yibam was an islandess. Now there's no Yibam with islandess. It's Eishav Shalom Malka Mitzvah, because she can't have children. So what happens now? It happens now that the Tzara, the co-wife, married improperly. According to Bekiva, even though it's only a law, according to Bekiva, that's considered bad adultery, right? It would be a mamzer. This I was again tasting she's going to leave both marriages. The Tzara made a mistake now. She should have waited to see that her co-wife wasn't an islandess. What should she have done? She should have waited. made sure that the girl, must have been a young girl, must have been 12 because you couldn't tell yet that she was an islandess. Usually by 20 you could tell, right? She should have waited. I'm Rabbi Tashma, another proof. I'm a poetess or saying all the rights that we say. Remember, what do we say? If Reuben is married to Shimon's daughter, his brother Shimon's daughter, and there's a co-wife, and Reuben dies, okay, so she's pater, right? She's pater from paters, but Koresh Amr pater saying so what happened? There's no Yibmor Chalitza. Reuben dies, so Shimon can't marry his own daughter, so he's also from Sarah. Let's say the Tsaras went and got married to somebody else, but into islandess. Now it turns out that the daughter was an islandess, so she was out of the parsha anyway. Remember, let's say Reuben was married to Shimon's daughter, but he divorced her, and then he died, so the co-wife would have Yibum. So here also, she's an islandess. So again, the co-wife shouldn't have married somebody else. Turns out that's what it turns out. Tasting Zem, now the co-wife has to leave both marriages because she committed adultery. According to us, if we don't like Rabbi Kiva, it's only in Isser Lav, so it's not as bad. But according to Rabbi Kiva, that it's in the Serve and make a David he's like Yibam Lashuk, 5 creases like Eshes Ish Mamish. So it's a real problem. Tasting Zem again, but what should she have done? The boy late. I'm telling you, she should have waited. In other words, we're saying does not do we really say what should she have done? Here you see these cases, we don't even give it an allowance for what should she have done. You see over here, we don't pay attention. The answer is no. There's something she could have done. She could have waited. I'm Rabbi Tashma, another one. Because of Sofra, get Leish, what happens is who gives the get? The man gives the get to the husband. So the Sofra writes the get to the man, and then he writes a receipt to the woman who's going to give it to the man, because the woman's going to say, okay, you're going to give me the ksuma now. The man's going to say, I want a receipt. Because if you don't give me a receipt, you're going to come back tomorrow, the next day, and ask for the money again. They didn't have checks in those days, right? So he says, if you don't give me a receipt. So he writes a get for the man, and he writes a receipt for the woman. The man takes the get and gives it to the wife. He pays her, and she gives him the receipt. That they reversed it. Then by mistake, the sofer gave the get to the woman, and he gave the receipt to the man, and then they exchanged it. So did the man give his wife a get? No, the wife gave it to the man, and he gave her the receipt by mistake. They didn't read. Because get the sofer get leish b'shav leisha v'toy. Man was like nothing get leish b'shav leisha. Sorry, get leisha b'shav leish. We know some they exchange them. The zel zev. Well, afterwards, already get Yosem Tachziyadish. Somebody says to the man, "Let me see that receipt." Turns out he got the get. He got the get from her, and she got the receipt from him. So it's all mixed up. And she got married based on that get. She's got a receipt instead of a get. Why don't you say what should she have done? So you see, what should they have done is not an excuse. No, the answer is there. They could have easily done something. They should have had it read by somebody who can read. If they couldn't read, they should have had it read. Rashi Toshma, let's say he changed his name or her name. They made a mistake in the name. You'd have to write the name properly in the get. Shemir, his city, her city. Again, if the get's not written properly, what should she have done? If they made him say, he should have read the get. In other words, if there was a mistake made in the get, you should have had it read by a rabbi who can read. So these things are all very simple. You don't say, these are not proofs that, we don't use that svar. What could they have done? Here, there was something they could have done. They could have had it read. They could have waited. Rav Tashma, what about this one? Kansa beget kereach. Let's say he married. Kansa beget kereach. He married her. The second guy married her based on a bald get. A bald get is a get where they write the signatures on the outside. They used to discourage kohanim or people who were let's say quick to anger from giving a get. They would make them write a get and fold it over and sew it up and then put the signatures there rather than have it all on one side. So let's say at some of the folds, they didn't have a signature there. That's called a bald get, and that's not a valid get. So let's say the second guy married her based on a bad get, again, a bald get. Again, why? What could she have done? The answer is she should have had it read by somebody who can read. So we're saying over here now that this svara of Ma'av Lebevet is not such a strong svara, right? Because we try to see what do we really say Ma'av Lebevet? All these ideas you could say Ma'av Lebevet. No, they could have done something. Rav Papa said, listen, here is Rav Papa had a case came before him with a woman who remarried based on the testimony of 2 witnesses, and she went to marry number 2. And he said, listen, there's 2 witnesses over here. What could she, she married number 2 based on that. And then when number 1 showed up, We said number two, she should be able to go back to her first husband, because what could she have done? There were two Eidim there. What could she have done? Amalei, Rafuna, Breda Rishua, Rav Papa, but time we learn Kalim Masai. We learn all these prices which said Mahav Lemebet is not an excuse. Amalei V'Lavshin. And we said we gave answers to them. In these cases, these are not cases of what could they have done. She could have waited, right? She should have shown the get, or you could have shown the get to somebody who could read. Didn't we answer them? Amalei Vashnuye Lake of Elizabeth. We're going to rely on these answers. The basic idea over here is what could you have done is not an answer. You could have tried harder. What could you have done is not an answer. Okay, you gave an answer. Here it's easy. You could have waited. You could have given it to somebody to read. What could you have done is not an answer. In other words, it's not an answer here too, and she should have checked, despite the fact that two Eidim came along. Even if you went to a bezin, the two Eidim came along, should have checked more carefully, and therefore, upasak. So he takes out the pasuk, but Rashi points out the nimn of Lav, based on that, Rav Papa didn't allow her to go back to her first husband. So at the end of the day, the psak is that if they report to her that number one died, two people said, certainly if one person reports, then she goes to a bezin. Bezin allows her, but bezin allows her based on the fact that she's going to check carefully. Even though if two people come along and say, two Eidim, kosher witnesses come along and say that number one died and she marries number two, then number one shows up. Okay, we had a shallow before, if we're not sure if it's number one or not, right? We have Eidim, is it number one? But if you know number one showed up now, they all recognize him, she recognizes him, then she can't go back to number one according to the halacha. Rav Shimon says she could in the Mishnah, but the halacha is not like that. Amar Bashi, only if the guy shows up. But let's say there's just a rumor that he's alive. What happened? She got married to number two, right? She got married to number two based on the two witnesses. And then there's a rumor broke out that number one is still alive. We're not worried about rumors. Hey, what kind of a rumor? We're talking about Ilay called the Basra soon. If it's the call that came out after she got married to number two, Rashi already said that. Rashi already said, what's he teaching? Rashi already said that once. Rashi, call the Basra soon. Any rumor that comes out after the wedding, we discount that. If he shows up, let him show up. But just the fact that there's a rumor doesn't mean anything. It says Mao, the same whole, that's why the Bezin over here, since she came to court here, right? If she came to Bezin, Bisharina, they were matter, whether it's with one aid or with two aidim, could call the communist suindam. It's like a rumor that came out before, because the fact that she came to court means that there's some question, right? She came to court to get permission to get married, sounds that there's some suffix about it. I heard rumors, you know for sure that he's dead. They don't have the body here. If they showed up with the body, if the body shows up and he's dead, she doesn't have to go to court to get permission. There's some suffix about it. Therefore, it's like a rumor that was before the marriage. And rumor before the marriage, you do have to listen to. The titzah, she should be also to get married to her first husband. Kamashma, we don't say that. So here it's mashma that even if she came to Bezdin, Bezdin Latira, they were concerned maybe he was alive. That we don't say that. And therefore, it's not like a rumor that went out there, but rather she got married to number two. And if a rumor came out afterwards, we discount that rumor. We don't pay any attention to it. And she could stay married to number two, unless, of course, number one shows up. If number one shows up after two witnesses, according to Shimon, she could go back to her husband. According to the Psak, according to the Rabbanan, she can't go back to her first husband. All right, we'll pick him here tomorrow. Have a good day, everybody. A good Isru Chag. And to Chomi and others, Rumi is not online because Rumi can't. It's for him. It's Yom Tov there. He can't go. He can't do the Zoom. So we'll say Chag Sameach.